So there are a number, I put a bunch of different scales on here. People always say, how can we measure these things in autism? So I put a bunch for you. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'll tell you though, the first one, the Pediatric Anxiety Rating Scale, is probably one of the ones that's better researched out there now, that has pretty good validity as a tool. I don't know how publicly accessible it is, like in terms of publishers, like some of these other ones. These other ones you have to be very cautious about because they can often tend to have a high level of acquiescence, a high level of people tending to say yes and agree. It doesn't distinguish, they're not designed for autism per se, but it might at the very least help you structure questions about problem areas for the person. Same thing with the SCARED and the Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Scale. There's no active, you need to really ask about these kind of distinctions. So it gives you nice areas to start, topics to start on, but don't just rely on these measures as they're designed or you're gonna get a lot of false positives. Because a lot of what is autism will get picked up. And lastly, a whole bunch of different scales, not specific to anxiety, give us a little bit of flavor about anxiety. And they've been used a lot in the research, like the CBCL or Developmental Behavior Checklist. You have to be careful about using any one tool. None of them is going to show you, give you ASD, anxiety within the process of ASD. You have to kind of ask those questions yourself. I already talked about the ADIS. It's very useful if you can shift to the left and say changes from this point. Okay. How best to use something like the CBCL or the BASC? Use them, but hopefully you guys are using them in comparison to a baseline where you've already used them. Then it's brilliant. Right? Find out what's been used before. If they've used the CBCL before, use that again because at least then you can compare to that baseline to see what's changed, okay? Or what stayed the same. But let's not forget that all of this has to be done with a question around what are the functions of the behavior, right? Sometimes you don't need to go beyond figuring out, are these avoidance behaviors? Are these anxiety-driven behaviors? What are the functions of them? We clearly understand that this is to access tangibles or for escape-related behaviors or for attention and social attention. If you identify what these things are, that's going to really be a powerful kind of tool in your arsenal towards developing the best, most comprehensive CBT treatment plan. Okay. So anxiety is just a tip of the iceberg. When you hear anxiety, think broader than that, okay? I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call which is saying like, oh, this is, I've got problems with anxiety, and then you find out when you talk more about it that anxiety's there and also anger and depression and aggression and violence and other kind of stories. So it's usually it's like the canary in the coal mine, okay? There's a bigger issue typically at play, and that bigger issue is emotion regulation. Emotion regulation kind of is this mechanism that I think is very important to kind of consider beyond anxiety, okay? So I'm going to share with you our conceptualization of emotion regulation in autism and some of the same questions you can ask to free yourself from the anxiety content, okay? So the idea here is that you're focusing on the trunk of the tree, not the leaves of the tree. Right? Anxiety, those are the content areas. Let's see if we can address the mechanisms, and that might be the area to free us to get at a bunch of different stories. So emotion regulation is not an outcome. Emotion regulation is not one thing. Emotion regulation is a set of processes, a set of different strategies. Some of them are voluntary. We think about them. I'm going to breathe now. I'm going to take some time to count down from 10, right? Most of them are involuntary. I don't think about it in advance. I do something as a result of an increase in an emotional experience. Why? Regardless of whether it's voluntary or not, it's to achieve a certain emotional outcome and adjust an emotion that we have in two ways. One, the intensity of the outcome, or the other one, how long we're feeling that emotion for. So that's what we mean temporal and kind of intensity natures to accomplish a goal. Emotion regulation is not adaptive, it's not good or bad, it's just a set of processes. It's defined as adaptive if we achieve the right emotional state and there are no negative long-term consequences. If you're scared of going to the dentist, you could achieve the right emotion that you want, that is a lack of anxiety, by avoiding going to the dentist, but that's a maladaptive emotion regulation strategy. But avoiding playing in a pool full of sharks is a perfectly good adaptive emotion regulation strategy. You're still responding to your emotion, and you're achieving the same outcome, right? We all do emotion regulation, and we do it all the time. It's both developmental and relational. I talked about kind of the relation before. But children often, what bears saying again, is that children often depend on their parents for emotion regulation. Involuntarily so. We look to our family caregivers. So in this case, sometimes improving the emotion regulation abilities in a child or outcomes in a child means supporting parents and helping parents in their process to contain and for them to stay calm in the presence of their children's emotionality.